Hello and welcome to another episode of Agency Leadership Live. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, and today we're going to talk about one little word that's holding back many of you, and we'll try to figure out what we can do about it so that you are not held back. So, let's get into the show. All right, so what is this one little word that I'm talking about? Well, it turns out that the answer to the problems that many agencies have was dreamed up, well, popularized, let's say, many years ago by someone named Nancy Reagan. Really? Is that what I'm saying? Yep. So, now wait a minute. How about that? That is the wrong screen there. For some reason, it is not showing what is actually on my screen. I have this beautiful, right over here on this monitor, I have a beautiful photo of Nancy Reagan with a Just Say No image. For some reason, my software doesn't want to show it. So you'll have to imagine Just Say No, the button that those of us who are old enough remember from the 1980s, from the Nancy Reagan war on drugs. And we can set aside what we think about the war on drugs and how effective Just Say No was as a campaign for that. But for agency leaders, Just Say No is something that they ought to be thinking about much more regularly. You ought to be saying no more than you do. I should be saying no more than I do. It's very difficult. Those of us who are in the agency community, we tend to be people pleasers. We want to make people happy. We want to help our clients achieve their aims. So it leads to us doing a lot of things we shouldn't, because we say yes to everything. We say yes to prospects. We say yes to clients. We say yes to volunteer opportunities. We say yes to so many things. It's holding us back. I think it was Michael Hyatt said, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. It's a great way to think about it. You really need to think about it, because otherwise you end up serving you're selling the wrong stuff to the wrong people at the wrong price. And so we're going to dive into those things and how you should figure out what to say yes to and what to say no to over the course of this show. If you have questions or feedback or thoughts, anything, feel free to share it in the chat, and I will be sure to try to respond or share it here as part of the show. If you're watching on replay, of course, just leave it in the comments, and other viewers would love to see it as well. If you want to find past episodes, agencyleadership.com/TV will take you to all of our previous live streams as well as pre-shot video. And as always, the Agency Leadership Council is free to join. You can get into our Slack community and talk with other agency leaders, have access to free documents and downloads. Just go to agencyleadership.com/join. All right. So, is no holding you back? Are those two letters holding you back? And the way that you want to think about this, as I said, was thinking about who you're selling to, what you're selling them, and what price you're selling it. That's the big overriding picture. But then there's other things that come into the process later on down the road. But let's start with the selling side of things, because that's where most agencies get into a lot of trouble. They are trying to sell the services to the wrong prospects, or they, worse, actually do sell services to the wrong clients. And that gets you into a lot of trouble. It hurts your profitability, and it can even hurt your reputation. So you need to be very clear. Start with the what you're selling, the wrong stuff bucket. You need to figure out which services you're going to say no to providing. And it's difficult. Anytime a prospect comes along and says, do you do this? Do you do that? Trust me, I've been there. I love to say yes to that question. Of course we build websites. Of course we do social media. Of course we write content. Of course we do media relations. Whatever you want, we've got it. And the reason why we do that are twofold. One is because we're people pleasers, but the second, more importantly, and this is particularly prevalent right now, we're saying yes because we want the revenue. Maybe we need the revenue. Maybe the agency is in a tough spot right now. Clients have put work on hold. The economy is in questionable shape at best. We want to say yes to anything that comes across the transom, because that's something that we think will help us make ends meet. And it may, in the short term. And of course, right now, you're going to have a little bit bigger acceptance for the slight adjustments in your scope, the slight movement outside of your ideal client profile. But you can't go too far astray. You need to be very clear about what you do and what you do well for clients. And so you need to say no. When someone comes to you and asks you if you can take on a project that is not in your wheelhouse, you need to say no. If you say yes, you probably won't price it correctly because it's not work that you normally do, so you really don't know what it's going to take. You're probably not going to execute well on it, which is a potential hit to your reputation. Not to mention, it's going to cause that client to question whether they should work with you again. There are just too many things that can go wrong. But more importantly, if you keep saying yes to all of these different service requests that are outside of your wheelhouse, you never truly become a specialist. And by becoming a specialist, you become more efficient. If you can work on the same types of client projects on a regular basis, you'll figure out how to do them better. You'll figure out how to do them in less time. And you'll get that edge that you will not get if you are spreading yourself all over the place and taking a shotgun approach to your services because you won't say no. So now we've got the services, but what about the people? Are you selling to the right clients? Well, that's a real problem because most of you have a challenge defining your ideal client and sticking to it. So if you say that you can do your suite of services, so you've defined your suite of services, you've done a bang up job of saying no to the things that you don't want to do, that you can't do well. If you say you can provide that to anybody, you're still in this same boat where you're saying yes to too many prospects and not saying no enough. Because you need to be very clear in your mind the kinds of organizations that you work best with. It may be by sector, it may be by how they're organized internally. For example, in my case, I work with agency owners. It's my specialty. If you're an agency that's owned by a holding company, could I help you? Sure. It's not my specialty. So I say no to those engagements because I know who I can deliver for best and most reliably. And so you need to have that same clarity of the people that you serve. And when you're dealing with prospects who are outside of your ideal client definition, your default answer has to be no. It doesn't mean that you can't experiment and perhaps try an occasional client that's not in your specialty area because maybe you have a relationship or maybe you think that this might be an area you're interested in exploring. Your default answer should be no, and more often than not, you should say no to anyone who is not your ideal client. And the third piece of this in the selling stage of not saying no enough is the wrong price. The vast majority of agencies are not selling their services at the right price. More often than not, you are underpricing your services. The reason why you're underpricing your services is twofold. One, you say yes to just about everything. And when someone pushes back and says, well, we don't have the budget for that, you say yes to giving them a discount. You're not taking enough work off the table to maintain the profit margin that you need to be successful. And what is that profit margin? You don't know, because one thing you have said no to is project budgeting, timesheets, those kinds of things. And I know they're a pain, they're not fun, but they're critical to getting price right. And if you don't know what it costs you to deliver a service, you're going to have a very difficult time delivering profitably because you're not going to price it correctly. So you need to learn to say no when a client pushes back and says, we want this for less. You need to learn to say no when you're asked to quote for something that you're not familiar with because you're not going to do it well and you're probably not going to price it right. So you need to be really in a position where you are comfortable and confident in saying no to the things that are not good for your agency. If you say yes over and over again, you will be selling the wrong stuff to the wrong people at the wrong price. But saying no doesn't end once you've made the sale. It continues on. We have a habit. Once we've signed up a client, we allow scope creep to occur. We say yes to whatever the client asks us to do. That can be forcing us out into services that we don't typically provide. frankly, in my own agencies, I've been very bad at this. I've even said yes to things that aren't even agency work, period, just because you want to try to help that client do whatever. And if you're in that mindset of service, it's very difficult to say no. I understand that. But you need to draw the line on which services you're going to provide to those clients and not allow the scope creep outside of your strength, outside of what you've sold the client on. But you also need to say no when they ask you to do more than what you have contracted with them for. And part of the problem is that many of you have contracts that are pretty vague. And I get that. I've been that guy too, where I have a very vague retainer agreement with a client. And so you have to sort of make case by case decisions, and that's hard. But the more clear that you can be in the arrangements that you set up with clients from the get-go, the more you can create a structure, a framework in which you can say no appropriately and without harming the client relationship. Because that's where this saying yes tends to come into play. We're so afraid of losing the business. We're so afraid of the client walking away that we say yes to almost every request that they make, no matter how unreasonable it may seem or how unreasonable it may actually be. We need to learn to say no. You can start that by using a proper contracting process. And so I'm a fan of a two-step approach where you have a master services agreement and then you do statements of work for the individual projects or retainers that you may have under it. And this allows you to very clearly state what is or is not in scope. That scope of work, that statement of work needs to be very clear about what you are doing. And it should call out anything that you're specifically not doing for that particular client engagement. And if you've set up that structure and those rules, that's step one. Step two to being able to say no appropriately is that you need to call out the requests that clients make. And even if you do them outside of scope and at no additional charge, you need to make clear that you're doing it and that it's a one-off exception. Otherwise, it becomes the new normal, to overuse a phrase that we're probably all sick of hearing right now. But one of the challenges that you run into as an agency in your agency-client relationship is that you keep saying yes in the beginning. You don't say no enough, and so gradually the scope of the project continues to increase. And by the time it gets to the point that it's painful enough, that it's impacting your finances enough that you say, hey, I need to do something about this, you're then going to the client with a whole long list of things that you want to carve out that they've asked for and say, no, this was outside of scope. We agreed to do all of this. Very hard to do that long after the fact. So you need to nip it in the bud and you need to be drawing those lines. And honestly, most clients are receptive to this. They understand it. Their own businesses have their own lines. I mean, if you go to Dell and you're buying a computer, you get that computer. You don't keep getting additional things. If you're going to a restaurant and you order one meal, you don't start getting extra things. You need to have that same mindset as an agency leader. You need to be very clear about what you are providing and what you are not providing. And when you're asked to provide something outside of that scope, or you're being asked for free refills, if you will, you need to be prepared to say no. Now, you also need to learn to say no beyond the selling and client service side of things. There are any number of things that you are confronted with as an agency leader where your default answer is yes. Will you serve on this board? Will you volunteer for this activity? Will you participate in this meeting? Will you take part in this Zoom call? Will you help out by being a guest on this podcast? Even my podcast. Sometimes you probably should say no to my podcast. I'd rather you didn't. I love it when you are actually on my podcast, but you need to be very thoughtful about what you're going to do, how you're going to spend your time. We always talk about the agency world as one in which we don't want to be selling time, but the reality is that's what we're doing. Agencies, by their very nature, package up talent and sell that talent to clients. And that is a time-limited thing. We only have so many hours in the day, whether an agency owner or a junior account executive or intern or whatever. We need to say no in order to give ourselves more time to focus on the things that we need to focus on. And you need to think about that even inside your own business. So I've been talking mostly about working with clients or those on the outside, but you need to say no internally too. You need to be looking at the tasks that you're taking on as an executive or owner of an agency and say, is this worth my time? Should I be doing this? Should I be delegating it or should I not be doing it at all? If you're not saying no to the things that people are approaching you with, you're going to be spending a lot of time doing things that are not worth it. So you need to ask yourself, if you are paying someone your hourly rate to do this work, would you actually pay that amount? If not, you probably shouldn't be doing it yourself. So you need to say no. You also need to say no to your own ideas. And this is where I get into trouble. So I'm preaching to myself right now. I am trying to convince myself of this because I have a never-ending list of business ideas, marketing ideas, harebrained ideas, and I need to learn to say no. But you do too. Agency owners, agency leaders are creative people. You know this. You are probably just chock full of ideas, whether you keep them on Post-it notes or in Evernote or somewhere else, a Google Sheet, or just up in your head. You have lots of ideas. You need to say no to most of them and pick the ones that you can execute on the best, that will deliver you the best results in the near term, or that will deliver you the best results in the long term, knowing that it's an investment only for the long term. If you're not culling ideas, if you're not culling the activities that you're working on right now, you're making a mistake. You need to just say no. And you need to review this from time to time. We're all engaged in a lot of activities, and we say yes 2 years ago, and yet it keeps on going. That goes for a lot of the boards that you may be serving on, or organizations you're volunteering with, or extracurricular activities you're doing, or even some of the marketing initiatives that you have as an agency. You should be reviewing them and not feel like you have to keep doing it. Particularly right now, so much is changing around us. It's an opportune time to take a fresh look at everything that we've said yes to. So I'm curious, what are the things that you should be saying no to? Think about it. Are there things that you're doing today that you question the value of? Are there clients that you're serving that you're not sure are the best fit? Are there prospects that you're pursuing that in retrospect you probably should say no to? Take the time to think about all of these things. Figure out where you can say no. Because if you start saying no more often, it will become a positive habit, because that means you'll be able to spend more time and invest more energy in the things that you are saying yes to, because they are good fits for your business or for yourself. You don't want to be selling the wrong stuff to the wrong people at the wrong price. You don't want to be over-servicing clients because you're too afraid to say no. You don't want to be consuming all of your free time by saying yes to everything that everyone is asking of you. So if you learn to say no, if you just say it a little bit more frequently, you will start to see better results because your time will be better managed. Your agency resources will be better deployed. So that brings to a close today's episode. You can obviously see previous episodes at agencyleadership.tv. And of course, a replay of this show will be there. So if you've come in late, feel free to pop on over there and you'll be able to see the replay as it gets posted. Of course, you can subscribe and hit the notification button in YouTube so that you get notified of all of these live streams. I do them Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time. Monday and Wednesday we have topics. Friday, of course, is open Q&A. If you have questions, feel free to email me, chip@agencyleadership.com. I'll be happy to try to cover them on Friday's show or send you a personalized response. And as always, if you'd like to join the Agency Leadership Council for free and have access to the Slack community for more conversations with myself and other agency leaders, agencyleadership.com/join is the place for you. So with that, that will bring to a close this week's episode. Have a good couple of days, and I will see you back here on Wednesday.